Spells, my favorite. Today we're gonna look at cantrips going all the way up to 4th level spells. And there's quite a lot of changes, so let's get into it. Welcome to Pack Tactics, where spells are better than features. By the way, I've made 2 other spell videos already. One is about super duper new spells with brand new game language we've never seen before. And the other covers new spells with spell design philosophies. I highly recommend watching those 2, especially this one, because I show off the new spellcasting rules there, and that's important. Anyways, we'll go through this in order of level, and I'll mention things that I think are interesting. Starting with cantrips, especially Eldritch Blast. I actually expected this to be nerfed to only scale based on warlock levels, but no. The change here is that you can now target objects with this. That makes it a lot easier to trigger traps or detect mimics. You can finally shoot the chandelier and it falls on the enemies. You can probably even break down a door with this, maybe break a lock. There's a lot of things. It's gonna be interesting watching warlocks now, because I know they're gonna abuse this. And I mean, you know, that's fun. Next, Shillelagh. This got boosted. It does force damage now, but the real buff is the cantrip scales. It's not really a game changer like at all. The scaling is like 1 DPR, but it's nice, I suppose. Chill Touch. This is now a spell with a range of touch instead of being a ranged spell. In turn, the damage die was buffed from a D8 to a D10, though undead no longer have disadvantage on attack rolls after you use it on them. I don't really think this is a good cantrip. Maybe you pick it up if you often end up in melee, but that's something you should try to avoid. Next, the ultimate meme cantrip, True Strike. Back in 2014, this absolutely sucked. Basically unusable. Now there's definitely a use case, specifically for subclasses that can replace an attack with a cantrip, because this is basically an improved attack and it scales. Pretty nifty. Similar to Chill Touch, Poison Spray's damage now is applied differently. A ranged attack instead of a Constitution saving throw. It also has a 30-foot range instead of 10. I think the range is a bit too limited for this to be worth considering though, especially with its damage type. Also, I think a saving throw makes more sense for a spray, but that's just me. Produce Flame. I like the changes. It has a bigger light radius and it has a bigger range for its attack. This is a pretty good cantrip for druids. Next, Sacred Flame. I love the changes, but mechanically nothing has changed. A lot of people thought this spell could go through total cover, but that makes no sense because something cannot be a target if it's behind total cover. So the part where it says that a target gains no benefit from cover never applied. Next are Blade Ward and Resistance, 2 spells that previously had niche cases where they were useful. Blade Ward no longer grants resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage by weapons for a round. It now lets you reduce attack rolls by 1d4 for 1 minute, but you have to concentrate on it. I don't think this will come up that often, because if an encounter is scary enough that you need to bolster your defenses, then concentrating on something else is better spent. Especially if you have like 1 or 2 encounter days. Resistance has gone from giving you a d4 that can be added to a saving throw to reducing damage by a d4. This is much, much worse. Instead of potentially having or even reducing damage to 0, you are reducing it by 3 per damage instance. It also doesn't help against non-damaging effects anymore. You know, the actual scary effects. The ones that shut you down. Guidance. It's worse, but I personally don't mind it too much. Instead of being able to add 1d4 to 1 ability check within the minute that the spell is cast on you, it now adds 1d4 to all ability checks, but only for a chosen skill. That means you can no longer add this to your initiative score, which is a bummer, but I personally never did this anyways, because majority of tables I played in had that very specific interaction nerfed. Now for 1st level spells, we're gonna start with the most interesting one, Sleep. Ooh. Sleep got both of its legs broken broken. It is hurting. Instead of a 20-foot radius, this now affects only those in a 5-foot radius. It's really tiny, look how small it is. And instead of creatures falling unconscious based on their hit points without a saving throw, they need to fail 2 wisdom saving throws. If they failed the first one, they become incapacitated first. It's no longer an auto win button at level 1 and 2. But I do think it's still decent though. It's basically an AoE version of Hideous Laughter, which is a pretty good spell. By the way, when you upcast Hideous Laughter now, you can target more creatures. Next is Armor of Agathis. First change is that it now has a bonus action cast time instead of an action. That makes it a lot easier to cast in combat, which is nice. The biggest change, however, is its duration. Or, well, its early end condition is really what I mean. Instead of ending when you lose the temporary hit points from the spell, it now ends when you don't have temporary hit points. This means that if you have some way to gain more or refresh your stack of temporary hit points, you can keep this spell up for much longer. I don't think there are many early game options that you should use for this purpose, but if someone with Armor of Agathis gets polymorphed, then it will matter. I made a video about this, by the way. I am actually really surprised they boosted Armor of Agathis. Armor of Agathis has always been good. Now for Find Familiar. From a quick glance, this looks unchanged. But you can now actually summon any beast with CR0 instead of just the examples. This is really not that big of a deal. I forget who pointed this out, but someone mentioned that you can now summon a vulture and use it as a mount. When I first heard about this, I was like, whoa, no way. But after thinking about this for a long time, it's actually got many issues. First, you need an exotic saddle. This is 60 gold, so you'll likely not have that at level 1. That's probably not a big deal. Second is Vulture only has 7 strength, so they can only carry 105 pounds, or lift 210. The saddle itself already weighs 40 pounds. The Vulture has 7 strength. I don't think there are many adventurers that are light enough to make this work. It might work for me because I'm a little kobold, but most people aren't me. And even if you did get everything to work, it has 5 HP. Sure, you can potentially default kill with this, assuming the enemy doesn't have ranged attacks. You just fly up and shoot down. But there's already a lot of ways to force those default kills. I don't think this stands out. As soon as I get Phantom Steed, I'm gonna use the Phantom Steed. And this one's funny. Divine Favor. I've seen a lot of people go crazy over this spell. It no longer requires concentration. But guys, it's literally 1d4 damage per hit. You should not care about this spell. It sucks. Next, Command. It's become quite a bit stronger, or well, arguably. The target no longer needs to understand the word you say. Additionally, if you upcast a spell, the targets no longer need to be within 30 feet of one another. Finally, you can no longer make up your own words for this spell. I really don't mind that change. I like the clarity that the given options provide. But I understand why some people enjoy the freedom it provided before. Chromatic Orb is interesting. It has kind of fused with Chaos Bolts. Because there are more dice involved, the chance for 2d8s to equal one another is bigger than Chaos Bolts. From 12.5% to 47-ish%. If we cast a spell at first level, let's assume we have a 70% chance to hit. And also let's assume there's a secondary target. The average damage we get is 14.97 damage. That's quite a bit higher than Magic Missile. That's 10.5. But split between 2 targets and without guaranteed damage, it's just okay. I still don't think this is better than Magic Missile. Witch Bolt is another spell that was much improved. Instead of requiring the initial attack to hit as well as an action each round to do its damage in subsequent turns, you can now do it automatically. That's with a bonus action, by the way. Which means you add 6.5 DPR to your existing damage, which almost guarantees that you're doing more damage on average in any round where the spell is active than we'd be doing with Magic Missile. This time it's against one target, and let's assume we're casting a damaging cantrip too. The question is whether this is worth your concentration. I definitely don't think so at late levels, but it's something to consider early game, I think. Good Berry, my favorite spell. It's still very effective, even becoming a bonus action now to be eaten instead of an action. Kinda like potions. It did get indirectly nerfed through a change to Life Cleric, which basically removed the Life Berry combo. Still though, Good Berry is still worth casting, especially with leftover spell slots. It lasts 24 hours, like come on. You can rest cast this. Next, Unseen Servant. It now has hit points, which doesn't do anything as nothing can affect it, rules as written. But whatever, I think everyone gets the intent. Now, Hex and Hunter's Mark were basically unchanged. And finally, Shield somehow survived. It wasn't nerfed. What? Why? I have no idea. Now we're at second level spells. We're gonna start with a funny one immediately. Spiritual Weapon. It sucks even more now. It requires concentration now. I gotta get serious though. So, secretly, this is a cleric boost though, because people are less likely to use this trap option. Next, Arcane Lock, which was buffed. Instead of just becoming harder to unlock through mundane means, it can only be unlocked through magic. This becomes insanely funny if you pick it through spell mastery. That's some good trolling. But in normal gameplay, I don't think this changes much, because you can still destroy containers or locks. Bark Skin now gives a minimum of 17 AC instead of 16. Whatever, still not very usable. Dark Vision now provides 150 feet of dark vision instead of 60. That's actually pretty decent, but it's very expensive. I guess you can rest cast this, and that would be pretty good. It's probably not worth it unless you know, oh, you're gonna go in a dark dungeon. Find Steed was wildly changed. First, instead of picking a variant of stat blocks, you now get one with specific features depending on whether you choose the Celestial, Fey, or Fiend creature type. Second, Find Greater Steed was fused into the spell, giving you access to 60-foot flight when you use a 4th level spell slot on the spell. This is kind of a funny change because it means you can get access to flight faster by multi-classing after getting the spell at level 5. Multi-classing spells rounds up now, so by picking up 4 more full caster levels, you have the spell casting of a 7th level full caster, giving you access to Find Greater Steed. That means you got it at 9th level instead of 13. Third, spells you cast that only target you no longer affects the steed. Fourth, you can no longer make the steed act as independent while still following your commands. What I mean by that is you can no longer attack while you're riding it. I think the forms definitely aren't bad, but I'm seriously gonna miss the flyby from Dragonels. But anyways, the spell is still incredibly valuable. Next, oh, here we go. This one's interesting. So, you know how Wizards of the Coast contacted me? Well, I think the video that they originally saw was Mirror Image, because they hyper buffed this. Its biggest problem is no more. It no longer becomes worse the higher your AC is, as the duplicates only dissipate if they are hit and you are hit. The former can actually only happen if you are hit. Another big improvement, even if we disregard the images dissipating before you're hit with the old mirror image, the new one is more likely to protect you. It's a little bit harder to calculate now, but with one image, there's a 66% chance. With 2, we get 88%. And finally, with 3, we get 96%. That's massive. This spell is basically bound to eat 3 attacks for you in combat. My old video is super outdated now, but I still prefer Rope Trick over this spell because Rope Trick works with the whole team. But this spell is good. There's nothing wrong with you picking this. I don't even think that closing your eyes counters this spell anymore. But do take into account that Blind Sight and True Sight are still commonly found among creatures with strong attacks. So the spell hasn't turned into fantastic. Let's move on to Phantasmal Force, which does 2d8 damage instead of 1d6. They must have thought nobody uses this spell, but this is an insanely good spell. Think about it. Iron Maiden. A bucket of tar over somebody's head. A squid on somebody's face, blocking their eyes. Now, of course, everything I just mentioned is DM fiat, and there's a question whether they get the blinded condition or not. Rules as written, they don't, but a lot of people get away with it. And that, of course, includes me. This is one of those spells that's really hard to cover, but deserves a standalone video. It's one of my favorites, actually. Next, Prayer of Healing fused with Catnap. Instead of healing 2d8 plus your spellcasting ability modifier hit points to 6 creatures, it now heals 2d8 to 5, but has an additional benefit of granting the benefits of a short rest. There is a downside to the spell only being able to affect someone once per long rest, but I do really like the change. It's especially funny when combined with Divine Intervention from Cleric. That lets you cast this as an action, giving everyone a short rest in the middle of combat. Your Warlock will absolutely love you. Maybe you'll get a kiss. Warding Bond gained a small change. You must now touch another creature. You can't touch yourself anymore. That's not a valid target. Heat Metal. You can no longer cook and book, meaning cast a spell on someone and then run off. You can only repeat the damage if you are within 60 feet of the target. Web was nerfed. No! Slightly. Yeah! Instead of a strength check to get out, it's now an athletics check. It's not much of a nerf, but it's still a nerf. Next, Suggestion. This is pretty crazy now, as it no longer needs to be worded in a way that sounds reasonable. You still can't make it obvious that they'll be dealt damage due to it, but it opens up a lot more options, which is pretty funny. Speaking of spells becoming crazy, let's talk about game breaking. Well, technically this one was already crazy, but the language used was so unclear that it was easy to sweep it under the rug and ignore it. I've literally been doing that for years, so I don't need to optimize with this spell. I hate this spell. But no, they made Magic Aura obviously overpowered, instead of it not being clear. I'm talking about Mask Effect, by the way. This allows you to change what creature type a creature is registered as for spells and other magical effects. This means that spells that are sometimes only eligible to be used for a certain creature type, like for example Simulacrum, Magic Jar, and Polymorph, and so on, can basically be used on anything. You can even combine this with Suggestion to force people to willingly go along with Magic Aura cast on them. Cause remember, it doesn't need to sound reasonable anymore. Magic Aura is the only spell that I've banned from my videos, but now I have to cover it. It deserves a standalone video. This spell is too crazy, and we can't ignore it anymore. If you take this to the most extreme with like planar binding and stuff, the game gets so stupid. It will utterly break everything. There's an insane amount of directions you can go with this. You can literally become a god. Let's just move on. Find Traps still sucks. Don't know why. Maybe it's memes. Whatever. I don't really care. Pass Without Trace indirectly changed as Surprise was changed. It now gives advantage to your team's initiative and disadvantage to the enemies instead of giving you a whole free round of turns. That is a colossal nerf. It got the sleep treatment. And just like sleep, this is still worth casting. As for a direct change, in 2014, it was a bit unclear whether creatures had to stay within 30 feet of you to reap its rewards, but now it's definitely the case. Some spells worth mentioning that weren't changed at all are Rope Trick, Locate Object, and to my surprise, Aid. In the playtest, Aid was changed, and I was like, oh my god, no! But they changed it back! Aid is back, boys! Yay! Let's look at 3rd level spells now, starting with Haste. This didn't change. Come on! This spell still sucks! I was really hoping this would get a boost, but nope. Next, Hunger of Hadar. It was changed from being blackness to darkness. Interestingly enough, nothing blocks dark vision from working through it, meaning it functions as normal darkness in that regard. This doesn't matter for the creatures inside, however, as they are blinded. This means that while creatures with dark vision outside of the area can see inside, those inside cannot see outside. That means everyone outside has advantage to attack those inside, and everyone who are inside have disadvantage to attack those who are outside. This spell is great. I like this spell. Counterspell got a lot of changes, some directly, some indirectly. First, it's important to realize that you can only cast one spell with a spell slot now on your turn. So you cannot normally counterspell someone that has counterspelled you, except if you are, for example, using a spell scroll to do so. And by the way, scrolls got boosted in 2024. Scrolls you scribe use your spell save DC and spell attack bonus now. So not only are they more important now in 2024, they're also more powerful. Remember, make scrolls. That's more resources for you. Second is the spell has become less offensive when used against players, as you no longer lose the spell slot used for the casting when counterspell is successful. Of course, NPCs gain the same benefit, but like, who cares? Third, instead of being a check to counter the spell, the target must make a Constitution saving throw against the user's counterspell saving throw. That proficiency is decently common among higher tier spellcasters, which means that you'll have a worse time countering their spells. As for Dispel Magic, funnily enough, nothing changed. It still doesn't work against magical effects if we go hyper rules as written, because when you target a magical effect, only the magical effect on the target ends, which is nothing. Now, obviously everyone knows the intent, but I was hoping they would fix this. Now, I know a lot of people are like, oh, you nitpick too much. But guys, I literally have friends who make fun of this stuff like all the time. I really don't want them to make fun of my favorite game. Come on. Next, tiny huts. Some important changes here. 1. You cannot stack it anymore, as the spell ends early if you cast it again. 2. You can cast spells of 4th level or higher through it now, which means you aren't completely safe inside. Still a fantastic spell though, be it through long resting or turtling. Sleet Storm has become a lot smaller. Instead of a 20-foot tall, 40-foot radius cylinder, it's now a 40-foot tall, 20-foot radius cylinder. Additionally, instead of prompting a Constitution saving throw that makes you lose concentration on a failed save, it's now included in the Dexterity saving throw, and I think enemies will fail that more often. It's still a really good spell, even though it's nerfed. Next, Fireball. It no longer goes around corners. As for the other heavy hitters, Animate Dead, Hypnotic Pattern, Phantom Steed, Glyph of Warding, and Plant Growth have remained mostly unchanged. Glyph of Warding now requires a perception check instead of an investigation check, which is like, whatever. And Plant Growth's text has been cleaned up a bit. Finally, let's take a look at 4th level spells. I think there are only 3 that are worth mentioning. First up is Banishment. It has become a bit worse. Its range is now 30 feet instead of 60 feet. And that hurts, but I think it's manageable. Another change is that the spell doesn't care about what plane a creature is native to anymore. It just cares about your creature type for the purpose of keeping a creature banished. That's probably a good choice, but opinions may vary. Next, Faithful Hound. You can be 300 feet apart instead of 100. You can also move the hound, and lastly, it's now a Dexterity saving throw instead of an attack. I think everything except for the last change is beneficial. If you're playing a Scribe Wizard and get Manifest Mind, then you can snipe with the Faithful Hound. You don't even need to be on the battlefield. You could just hide in a corner. But in general, with Faithful Hounds, you're still just using this for microwaves, I imagine. Last, and certainly not least, Giant insect. Oh, this spell goes hard. In the past, this used to transform existing creatures into either a giant centipede, a spider, a giant wasp, or a giant scorpion. Now you summon a creature like a Tasha summon, but without the stupid price tag attached to it. The stat blocks remain mostly the same for any option. The wasp gets 40 fly speed. The centipede gets a bonus action constitution saving throw feature with your spell save DC to poison creatures within 10 feet of it. Now, the spider, ooh, that's the best one. It's the only form with a ranged spell attack of 60 feet. It does 1d10 plus 3 plus your spell's level in bludgeoning damage. But the real kicker is that it reduces the target's speed to 0 until the start of the insect's next turn. That is crazy, especially because by default this does 2 attacks, as it is half the spell level. Another thing is it has 11 plus your spell's level in AC. That's like 15. And 30 plus 10 times the spell's level hit points. So 70 by default. This is very similar to Summon Greater Demon, but with a ranged attack that has a fantastic rider. Sure, the damage is a little bit low, but damn, I love this spell. It's so good. This is my favorite Tasha summon, and it's not even a Tasha's. And that's it for 4th level spells and this video. Stay tuned for part 2 where we go all the way to 9th level spells. End of video. By the way, I'll be gone for a few days without a computer, but I'll try to write a script while I'm gone. When I come back, I want to talk a little bit about weapon juggling. Anyways, have a nice week, everyone. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. You can also support me on Patreon if you want. That helps me directly. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.